Good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I am very excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Melissa Febos and Hevroleski. Thanks for attending. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 125 videos of past events archived on our website and our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now for formal introductions. Melissa Febos is the author of the brand new bestseller Girlhood, great book, which has received dozens of rave reviews since its release. She is also the author of the critically acclaimed 2010 memoir Whip Smart and the 2017 essay collection Abandon Me, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, a Publishing Triangle Award finalist, an Indie Next Pick, and was named a Best Book of 2017 by Esquire, Book Riot, The Cut, Electric Literature, Bustle, Medium, Refinery 21, The Brooklyn Rail, Salon, The Rumpus, and others. She's an associate professor currently at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. Joining her is Hevroleski, who we are so excited to welcome back to the FAN. We'll call it the FAN stage. Ms. Havrilesky is New York's Ask Polly advice columnist and the author of What If This Were Enough from 2018, How to Be a Person in the World from 2016, and Disaster Preparedness from 2010. She maintains the Ask Molly newsletter as well, written by Polly's evil twin, and it's fabulous. Make sure you subscribe to it. So now let's welcome Michelle Phebos and Heather Hevroleski.
Thanks so much, Lonnie. Heather, are you with me? Hi.
My power just went out, so hopefully.
I saw you. You think that you came back very quickly, though.
That was crazy. How are you, Melissa? I'm so excited to meet you, and hopefully the world doesn't end in the next 5 minutes. It seems like anything is possible these days, though.
It really does. It really does. Yeah.
So I read all 3 of your books in a row, which was amazing. I had never read your work before, incredibly. And it was such a journey to go from the Whip Smart to Abandon Me to Girlhood. I mean, it's such an interesting trajectory. And I was struck by the fact that there's almost like it felt to me that there was a trajectory from that started with a kind of sense of control over the world around you. Whip Smart, I felt very comfortable and assured, even when you were developing addiction, that you were going to come through it and that you were going to be fine. There's so much strength in that book, to its credit, and so much, so there's less fragility. It kind of comes through at the end, but your voice is just so assured. And then in Abandon Me, that fractures a little bit. And then Girlhood is this crazy sense of surrender and fragility suddenly that feels like I never would have expected it. So I guess I'm wondering, over the course of writing those 3 books, what kind of evolution did you experience as a woman and as a writer, and how has that influenced your developing voice and your perspective on the outside world?
Oh my God, Heather. I mean, first of all, do you bill by the hour? Do you take Blue Cross Blue Shield? And second,
yes.
Thank you for investing in reading all of my books. That it was totally not required, and I'm really grateful.
Me too. I was thrilled.
Totally a fan of yours, and it's an honor to be read by you. And it's really interesting that you pointed that out, because it makes perfect sense to me, although I've never thought about it in quite those terms, that sort of reverse, that sort of softening over time, and that sort of cracking open. And I think maybe the first way I'll answer that is sort of from the perspective of just me as a person. And I would say it makes a lot of sense. It's funny, it's almost hard for me I mean, it's definitely hard for me to go back and look at Whip Smart for a number of reasons, because I wrote it a long time ago now. But because there's such a control is such a priority in that book. And I think, I was the kind of kid who I was hypersensitive and hyper attuned to other people. And I sort of looked around when I was pretty little and thought, everyone is struggling. Like, I had great parents, but they were having normal human issues, getting divorced and whatnot. And I was like, I'm just going to take care of myself. I'm just going to be fine. And that's how I'm going to deal with being completely overwhelmed by life, And in many ways, I think that that's sort of an explanation for like why Whip Smart exists at all, like why that experience kind of happened at all. But I definitely was very committed to sort of a narrative and experience and presentation of composure from a really young age, because life felt so disempowering and so overwhelming, and both inside and outside, right? And I think in the experiences that I describe in Abandon Me, which was sort of an emotionally abusive relationship, and looking back into sort of my family history, and the facade started to crack, right? And I would describe Girlhood as sort of the narrative of how I sort of pull everything together and really figure out how to like go back to that very young person and like offer her the kind of tenderness and space to have her own experience that I was totally unable to do at the time, and really until I wrote this book in many ways. So
I mean, the book feels like a kind of act of reckoning, that almost it's like you're sorting through everything you've written up to that point, and coming at it from a perspective of much less, that there are fewer easy morals. I mean, this is sort of a trend in writing in general, and as you grow older and become an adult, and then become an older adult, not to put you in that category, but you have this sense of like the things that you were like, well, I'll never do that, and I'll always be like
Right.
this. All your easy morals fall apart.
Yep.
And suddenly anything is possible. One thing I really loved about the beginning of Abandon Me in particular is the fact that your voice is so self-assured and strong and never wishy-washy. I feel like we're in a very wishy-washy age where people are feel compelled to, there's a lot of self-consciousness obviously that rules our age, and people feel compelled to explain themselves even when no one's asking them to explain themselves. And if you spend any time on social media, you also have the impulse to, I've got to tell people where I stand on this, as if the world is waiting breathlessly for you to step up to the mic. I'm wondering how you managed to have such an unself-conscious, bold sort of positioning of, you had this affair with a married woman. You did, you do all these things in your first two books that are sort of, you're just you take a very bold, unapologetic stance that I think really works in the writing. But I'm wondering, was that a conscious thing? And were there specific writers that influenced that decision on your part? I mean, are your favorite writers sort of characterized by this sort of bravado or swagger? Because there's so much swagger in those two books.
There's that's a really good question. It's interesting. I mean, the obvious answer is like, yes, absolutely. I'm thinking of like the books, especially I think the books that I was reading when I was a really young person, and for sort of formulating a conception of both sort of what kind of writer identity I wanted to have, and also what were the options, what was a writer's identity. And I think it really was sort of writers who had a lot of like swagger, and also who were writing specifically about experience that would be very easy to judge, and they were not apologizing, which is not to say that there wasn't humility, and there's like a lot of scrutiny, I hope, in my books. But the other thing is that when I'm writing, two things. One is there's definitely a fair amount, especially in more recent years, of the sort of qualifying, explaining, contextualizing, pre-apologizing, pre-defending like nonsense that is the inevitable result of like social media and the moment in which we live. I just cut it out before people see it. And I have other people who help me cut it. Like the author's note in Girlhood was initially like 10 pages long. And it was basically like, dear all the people who are going to have an issue with anything in here, here are my pre-answers for you. Everyone who read it was like, no, like you just have to let people who are going to sort of willfully misread or look for what you didn't do. Like you just have to let them have that, you know? And the other thing is that particularly I think in Abandon Me and Whip Smart, like I was really kind of writing to myself. And in that way, I was trying to find like a bold, I don't know, unapologetic, but also I was just trying to look my own experience like in the eye. And so I really wasn't, and I have sort of a gift for compartmentalization that I've worked really hard in therapy to undo, but it still serves me very well in terms of writing. So when I'm working, it really is like I'm wearing blinders, and there's a stage later where I choose to think about like who might be hurt by my work and what my mom's going to think and all of that. But when I'm writing, I am just completely absorbed in the conversation I'm having with myself or my past self or my own ideas or other writers or whatever. But I'm really just like not thinking about sort of performing it. And so I think that the voice ends up pretty strong, because for me, when my voice gets wishy-washy or sort of opaque, it's because I'm trying to please too many people. You know, it's like I write a letter to a friend. It's like an exercise I give my students a lot to help them modulate voice, is like write a letter to a friend and your voice is utterly consistent because you know who you are to that person. And if you're trying to please everyone, the voice is all over the map. And that's often the case for my undergrad.
But if you try to please your friends constantly,
you got to pick a friend that you're really honest with. You know?
Yeah.
It can't be like when you're always showing off for. And I really think I'm writing sort of to myself or to a younger version of myself, or to a close friend who is going to call me on my shit. And that said, there is like, the last thing I'll say about this is that I do have a tendency for grand statements, like at the ends of things. You may have noticed there's a line in Abandon Me where I say, my partner teases me about it all the time. There's a line in Abandon Me where I say like, every lover is a destroyer. And she's like, whoa. And so sometimes if I'm like struggling with a power chord, she'll be like, every power chord is a destroyer. You know?
Oh my God.
So to make fun of me, because sometimes it's like, I can't quite stand by the grand statements, but most of the ones that make it into the published work I do. But I think I like to sort of cast a majestic statement just to test it, to see if it's true, to sort of test my thoughts and argue with them. And it's how I figure out what I think a lot of the time.
Yeah, I do that too. I think that the having the boldness to do that it takes you on a lot of journeys, you know, because you can start with something like that and you're kind of like, is that true? I got to battle test this now. Yep. And really Girlhood at times feels like that kind of, you're throwing ideas at the wall and then you're kind of seeing where they land and you're bringing in big thinkers and building from there. And it feels almost like a kind of jazz that way, where you're kind of starting with, you know, a lot of the chapters, almost a fragile kind of memory. And then it sort of splays out into this really evocative and satisfying experience for the reader. And it feels like you're going on the journey while you write.
It's really, it's really
is that
true.
accurate?
Yeah, it's very much an artifact in some ways of my thinking process and a kind of transcription of that. And of course I arrange it and clean it up and make it into art after that, but you're definitely sort of following in the essays like the passage of my own thinking and the development of my own ideas. And I do sort of, and I think in Girlhood particularly, I'm taking sort of the grand statements or ideas or beliefs that I decided on with great conviction. Sometimes in my earlier books, it's in writing, and I'm sort of picking them back up and saying like, is this still true? Was it ever true? What is true about this. And I think that that's sort of the route that a lot of them take, where it's sort of undoing the things I thought I believed in, or the interpretations of my own experience that I was really committed to in the past.
Well, I mean, it does feel like this path to maturity in that way, where you're, you know, just like as in each chapter, you're sort of battle testing ideas. There are things that show up in Whip Smart that sort of, you wonder as when I was reading Whip Smart, I thought, what is the story with her mother? Like, what's going on here? It seems like she doesn't mind blowing her mother off. I don't really get it. You know, her mom seems great. I mean, and this is the kind of thing that, like, as a memoirist myself, you shudder to think that you'll ever be asked about the, you know, the life that lives behind the portrayal that you're putting forward, because, you know, we're not really supposed to be interviewed about to just tell me the truth behind the book, you know, because the book is the document that you want. That's your story. But I was kind of thrilled when I got to the part of Girlhood where you actually address your mother. And because I started to read when you wrote, "It is so painful to be loved sometimes, intolerable even." And I thought, oh my God, there's that avoidant kind of distance that I've been feeling through these books. And then I thought her mother must have needed her too much emotionally because her father was always at sea. Like, that must be it. And then I came to the line that said, I did feel part father, part husband, and maybe every daughter does, or just the ones whose fathers are gone. So I cry so easily. I must warn you.
I'm like, neither of my parents are here. I'm pretty sure they're not.
Okay, good.
They were there, but
there's a vulnerability that Girlhood opens up into that I think is really beautiful. How hard was that to reach that place in this book? Because it really did feel like a new layer, and especially for someone who had such clear and defined boundaries along the way. Were there times when you thought, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, I can't reveal this much?
I mean, there have been times, but it's sort of like I said, and I can't really take credit for this because I think it's just the way my mind works. And I think it's probably part of why I'm a writer, is that when I go into the space of, like, you know, when I go under, I'm really not thinking about other people reading it. It's just like, it's partly a really engrossing conversation, partly a puzzle I'm really engrossed in trying to solve, you know? And I'm not thinking about other people until after. So that conversation or that fear or inhibition, it definitely comes up later. And actually, it's weird because in many ways, it's both greater and lesser than it was, like, with my first book, when I had no idea what it would be like to expose all of that to everyone who cared to know. And like with this last book, in terms of what I was exposing to, like, strangers, I was less concerned about that than ever before, because I've been through it. I've exposed things that felt way scarier in many ways. Like, this book was more vulnerable, but I understand that I will hear from the people who need it, and I don't really give a shit about the people who don't care or misread it or whatever. But when it comes to the people that I love, like, my understanding of how my work and my disclosures have affected other people in my life with whom I have actual relationships, like, that awareness has developed and softened, and I care more than I ever have before, sort of what I expose about other people and how it affects my relationships. And so I did feel careful, particularly with my mom, I think. And because I was exposing details that, honestly, in many cases, I mean, all of my work is full of details that I really think that no parent should really ever have to know about their kid. Like, actually, I think they should be protected from some of that. And there's a reason why we don't tell them all those details, because it's too painful. And so it's enough that my mom has had to be privy to all of that and integrate it. And, you know, it's like, whatever, an opportunity both for her and for our relationship. And we've grown a lot. And I'm sure on some level she's, like, appreciates it, but it's not been easy, you know? And so it also felt really important for me to communicate in this book how instrumental her and both of my parents, like the parenting I received, but particularly my relationship with her and the ways that she loved me that she couldn't see the effect in the moment. It just felt probably like pouring water down a sewer, you know what I mean? And then, but like we have such a beautiful relationship and we're so close now. And it was really important to me to sort of communicate in some way my ever deepening understanding of the ways that she sort of built a resilience into me that this book is the artifact of in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, you when you say it's hard to, it's painful to be loved, I really related to that. I have a line in I don't know how I'm ever going to do a reading of this book, but I wrote a marriage memoir that I just finished, and I have a line about how hard it is to stand still and be loved. And you don't, oh God, you don't realize how, you don't realize that you're holding people at arm's length when you're doing it often. You know what I mean? Like it takes a long time to wake up to that. And it almost takes, having love relationships that you have more control over, right? Just a return to control, where you feel safe to play with that distance. And then you can turn and say, wow, I keep a lot of my friends at arm's length. I keep a lot of people at arm's length. In a lot of your work, you explore the issue of boundaries. And you talk a lot about the distance you felt between yourself and your father, and the distance you kept between yourself and your mother, and then the boundaries that men violated and the ones that you dissolved on purpose, and also the boundaries you reinforced when you enforced when you were a dominatrix. Why do you think, I mean, I think we've kind of talked about this, but do you find that push and pull and that pressure, is this like a kind of constant in your life I mean, in talking to you, you seem pretty loose and not that boundary. I kind of expected more like controlled because you're turning over the question of control so often and boundaries so often.
Yeah.
Do you feel that this is like, I mean, and I also, I wanted to mention this quote that you said, I can't find it. My life calling is darkness. Where is that quote? I have it.
Oh yeah.
My
darkness is my work on this earth or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a beautiful, bold statement. My darkness is my worth.
There it is. I know. I do like to throw in a real banner sort of statement near the end of things.
And what does that mean? That your darkness?
I mean, I'll start with that because that's slightly different than what you were talking about before, but totally related. Yeah. I mean, and I think with that, it's something that I've been orbiting and getting at, sometimes even when I didn't know it in my writing and certainly in my life, which is that relationship that I have to boundaries and to control and to sort of trying to assert control and trying to lose control, trying to push boundaries because I want to know where they are. Like I want them to stop at some point. I want to know where the end is. Because there's a comfort in that, right? In containment, in constraint. And, but the way that has manifested, which is to say many of the ways that my decision-making, as an adult and even as a kid has looked like things that we largely describe in our culture as self-sabotaging, self-destructive, addictive. That's the most accurate one. They really have been pretty addictive, but they really look like pathological, like sex work and S&M and doing drugs and cheating on people and getting covered in tattoos, just like lots of extreme stuff that most people don't want to do. And I think I often have struggled, and I address this pretty directly in Girlhood, with feeling like what's wrong with me? Like, I had really nice, loving parents. Like, I did not experience a sort of major trauma in the way that we typically understand it. And I think part of it is that they aren't necessarily pathological. It's just my personality. And in other ways, it is the expression of my survival instinct, right? Like, I want to know where the boundaries of things are. I'm generally like curious and adventurous, but I also am sort of looking for, it's like there is a line, there's like a family story that I wrote about in Abandon Me. That's like a cute thing my parents would often repeat. And it was, we were on vacation in Florida and my parents were always wanted to go to the beach. And I always wanted to be in the pool at our like mediocre hotel. And they were like, why do you want to be in the pool when the beautiful beach is there? And I was like, the pool has sides, like, duh, And I, it's like with that kind of tenderness that I feel about that little person who is like, I feel safer here. I can see the bottom. I know where the edges are. It's contained, like I'm safe, and and it is that instinct that drove me into a lot of places that look pretty scary or dark. And it is through them that I have like sometimes in truly dangerous ways, but that I have like gotten sober and developed a spiritual life and learned how to have really truly intimate relationships with other people and how to do like, I just related so much when you were talking about not realizing that you kept your friends or the people who are most important to you at an arm's length, because I did that for so long because it felt safer. And it was through sort of like finding my own boundaries and I don't know, that kind of exploratory threshold crossing and pushing and experimenting that I ended up like the like pretty integrated person with really close, like beautiful relationships that I am today. And I could have died along the way, I'm really glad I didn't. But all of that to say that that line about like the darkness is really about sort of trying to let go of characterizing my past as messed up or pathological or self-destructive or, bad in any way,
Well, one of the things I really love about your writing is that you don't pathologize. Yeah, I mean, you do as little pathologizing around your choices as almost any writer I've read. And, it sort of feels, I think, especially for a woman, it's kind of an incredibly freeing and emancipatory, sensation to read another woman writing about these things that, I mean, obviously you write in your book a lot about patriarchal influences on all of these very personal realms. But I felt that there's something so intoxicating about reading a woman's story because we make women's choices moralistic, left and right, and they're always pretty much doing it wrong. They're always sinning. The sin always lands on the woman. The ambient shame in the room is soaked up by the woman. It's just really, I think it even just reading a tale where the narrator is extremely clear about, even if it just doesn't even go near the question of culpability, feels like a kind of salvation, I think. I mean, it's very out of step with the culture. And I feel that, I mean, it was almost like that lived in your work from the beginning. And as far as, I just wanted to add, when you talk about, I mean, I don't mean to make light of addiction, but the way that you navigated drug use, I felt was almost like overachievers addiction, where it's like this A student, it's just like A student addiction. Like everything's under control. You describe a few messed up situations, obviously, that are unsafe, but there's a lot of like, this is what I did. I put this here. It's like a ritual where you're in a safe spot. No one can find you. No one is watching. Yep. And even down to when you told your mother about it, it was the kind of like you took your time with everything. It's a very deliberate, it's an interesting interplay of a surrender to these forces and a very deliberate boundaried exploration of things that still make, I always kind of feel safe. Like, I'm pretty sure nothing that, I mean, even in Girlhood, it's all about assault, but you're never raped, which is great and amazing. And of course, you express your gratitude for that. It's really, yeah, I mean, I think that it's a fascinating thing in all three books. And I guess, okay, so I did want to, I want you to read something, but I wanted to also read this one part of Intrusions, the chapter Intrusions. You write of the peeping Tom who spoke to you outside of your window in New York. Eventually he stopped coming, but I could never sleep easy after that. I was always listening for some breach in the quiet, some shadow stilled across my bed. Though I moved a few months later and have many times since, I keep waiting. I think that any woman can feel that when they read that. It's just such a knowable sensation. You just really capture the quiet horror of waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for things to fall apart, holding your breath and expecting something tragic or frightening or even demeaning is about to happen. What do you think is the remedy for living that way? And do you feel like you're able to be carefree at this point in your life? Or do you think that, have you practiced a way of life that sort of embraces, I mean, because there are so many heavy parts of this book. And yet, you've survived and you're pretty happy-go-lucky as a person, as far as I can tell. So it's sort of like, I want to know, do you grapple with that? I mean, did you consciously move away from that state of waiting, I guess is the question.
Yeah. That's a great question. And you've said so many, you're such a good reader. Thank you. It's really nice to listen to somebody really smart who has read your work really carefully talk about it. It's a real pleasure. But yeah, I think, it's funny because as you were talking about it, talking about the sort of like overachieverness or the way that I present things in both a very sort of like, it's all kind of extreme, but also very controlled. And it feels, there's a part of me that's like, great, I accurately described what it was like, and really sort of created a portrait over these books of like this part of my personality, which is like at once needing to feel very safe and very in control, and to present an appearance of that. And then also just like desperate to sort of yield and have an impulsive experience and push boundaries and totally sort of erase my consciousness and see what really these sort of dueling impulses. And I think, I will say that I think one way of sort of talking about that is also to talk about being a woman in this country, in this culture. Of course, it's not one culture, but the way of like feeling at once sort of enjoying a lot of safety in a certain way, and also knowing that horrible, horrible things happen and could happen to me, and that I, in many ways, live in a really vulnerable body, particularly as a younger person, and sort of that push and pull of sort of living kind of wildly and then also being kind of scared all of the time. Do you know what I mean? And in some way, for me, I think those interacted where it was like, I also think in some ways nothing terrible happened because I was hyper aware and kind of freaked out all the time. And then, but I also was like, fuck that, and was like, I'm going to live exactly how I want to. I'm not going to be ruled by that. And so there was this, I was like living in that tension a lot of the time. And I also think that, that condition that I described in Intrusions of sort of always waiting, or, that essay came to be because someone else, there's like some peeping thing came up, and I told the story to my partner, and I was like, this guy like sort of stood outside of my window and stalked me and said horrible, like disgusting things outside my window for months. And I went to the police and they basically laughed at me, and I eventually moved. And I was like, but it didn't affect me that much, which was basically my story about everything in Girlhood for a long time. And she was like, what do you mean it didn't affect you that much? Like, you tape the curtains to the inside of the windows in your ground floor apartment that I lived in when we started dating. She was like, and you won't go walk through your own living room like in a bra in the middle of the night with no lights on. Like you always put something, you know what I mean? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I do those things, don't I? And I think there was this, like that anticipation of like something bad is going to happen was in some ways also a symptom of never allowing myself to like feel the reality of how it had affected me. And so like all of that, like I was like a little sponge soaked in fear when that was happening. I was obsessed about it. I was totally possessed by it, of like constant anxiety. And I never talked about it with a therapist. I never really talked about it with a friend. Like it was weird. I talked about it with my roommate. And then I basically was like, I felt powerless over this. I dealt with it. It's not a big deal. And, you know, in the essay, I also talk about all of the ways that when I was writing the essay, discovered that there's like all of this framing and like dismissal and, you know, all of this pop culture stuff that basically is saying that it's not a big deal. And I was like, it's not a big deal. And all that, I feel like that fear was like sank into a hard little like nugget that was like banging around inside of me for all the years until I wrote about it. And that sort of still waiting feeling was that terror kind of waiting inside of me and never being able to say like, that was horrible. It wasn't okay. And there was no one who would help me, you know, like that guy could have, you know, and like women are killed all the time. You know what I mean? Like that guy could have, we didn't have an alarm system. He could have done something and no one would have stopped him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like and I just knew that. I always knew that. And so I think like, I don't know, it's a weird thing to sort of feel really safe and unsafe for most of your life.
Well, it's interesting. I think that women, I mean, girls are almost particularly, you know, 20 years ago, growing up, we're almost conditioned to eat our fear and carry it around with us. It's like a part of our DNA, or it lives in our cells almost. And so, and you know, in some ways, I think you point to the ways that it's almost like you become a little bit of a fear junkie on the one hand, you know, I mean, there's this duality of like, you're moving away from this terrible feeling of vulnerability, but you're also attracted to situations that make you feel vulnerable at the same time.
Yeah.
It becomes just part of what you move towards, and you know, it's a hard kind of contradictory thing to express.
I think about that sometimes when I think about all of the women I know who watch like Law and Order Special Victims Unit, or like the ways that like, I don't watch that show,
yeah,
but
I know.
like mysteries. And I have very narrow criteria where I like mysteries where it's like good writing, but also like a female detective or like investigator or whatever. And it can't be like super gory. And there is something that feels kind of cathartic about like experiencing the fear. And then the most terrible thing doesn't happen. And like, there's this woman who sort of figures it out and asserts control and is okay at the end of it all. That I feel like is cathartic in the like Aristotle sense, you know, where it's like, I get to feel my feelings through watching it. And that helps sort of purge me of them, you know?
But that means you have to know exactly what the entire movie is about before you say it, right? Like, in order to feel it.
I'm rewatching the whole series. I don't know if you've ever heard of Vera, which is like Brenda Blevin. It's just this like cranky, smart, middle-aged woman detective who has like this cute, dumb male sidekick. And she just like solves, no one ever gets raped. It's only murders and it's never grisly. And she just like solves it every single time. And I'm rewatching the whole series right now because that's like where I'm at. It's very comforting, you know, it is. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. I don't watch, I was a TV critic when Dexter came out, and I had a baby, and there was the scene where the baby was in a pool of blood, her mother's blood.
Yeah, I watched a few episodes.
And I was like, I'm done with this. I'm done with this job and this genre.
But I quit.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah.
But it's interesting when you talk about that, you know, carrying that fear around with you, and yet, I mean, I don't know. I guess what I think mostly is, it's interesting how you have to know yourself as a writer. Like if you basically, my current position is just, we all are so completely controlled by forces that we don't understand. within us, and we don't have a good understanding of, the more I answer advice letters, the less I feel like most people know about themselves, myself included. So it's almost like you learn, it sounds like you learn through writing, and you sort of get to know yourself, and then have this cathartic experience where you're sort of like, now I know what my relationship to my mother actually is,
If I didn't, honestly, Heather, like there is almost no insight that I have that I didn't get from writing. Certainly, like maybe from conversation with other people, but like,
yeah,
it is, I really feel like I can say with total sincerity now, like if I knew for sure that no one was ever going to publish my work ever again, I would keep doing it, because it is so built into my life as a way of reflecting and understanding and comprehending. And just like, I would have no idea what I thought or felt. I think I would just like sort of drift farther and farther away from what I was actually feeling and thinking and my relationships, because that's my nature, is like, I just kind of want to be okay, which means that I can't feel what I feel. And so I have to, like, my whole life is sort of built around trying to work against that instinct to drift away and dissociate. And writing is the primary way that I figure things out. And it really does sometimes feel like mystical, or like a crystal ball, where I'm like, here I go, I'm going into this. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I know that I'm going to know more on the other side of it. Like it just does its work, and whatever intelligence like exists below my anxious, repetitive, like boring thoughts, like the portal opens and like things come out when I'm doing this process and sort of distracted by the art of it. And I don't.
Well, that's a good sign that you're surrendering yourself to it also, that you discover things and you discover intelligence that you didn't know you had. I have the same relationship to writing, and it becomes more and more like, this isn't just my career. It's what I do every day because I need to do it. I crave it, I crave the knowledge that lies beyond that kind of void that you hurl yourself towards in order to find things out and discover things. And I think that shows in your writing, actually, as I said before.
Your writing too. And I want to know, I desperately want to ask you more questions about your marriage memoir.
Oh, I thought you were just going to stop there and say about my marriage. Well, I'm going to have to answer them at some point. So might as well do it now.
Practice.
So I wanted to know, we don't need to talk about my marriage. I'll bore many with tales of my marriage soon enough.
Maybe we can reverse seats.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, and maybe we'll be next to each other in an auditorium instead. That would be great.
Cry now.
So you finished writing your book. I mean, we're getting kind of close to the end. I could ask you about your writing routine. I'm fascinated by, like, we talked beforehand about how you have a treadmill desk. I also have one. You've written about your back problems and having to manage your physical self. And I'm wondering, maybe we could just briefly talk about that and then talk about what you're working on.
I love talking about that stuff. When I was a grad student, I used to, when we had visiting writers, I would skip the reading and I would go to the craft talk, and I would always ask, like, what's your routine? What do you do? What time of day do you go? What kind of snacks do you have? Are you drinking a hot liquid or a cold? Like, I have a bottomless fascination with that kind of thing. And I probably always will. But yeah, I somehow have gotten used to writing while walking very slowly. And I am a very early morning writer, and that has not always been true. The morning has always been my best time, but I am not like an early rising body. Like, my body just doesn't want to get up early. But I made this commitment with my graduate students in the fall, where I said I made all of them take on a new practice because all of our writing had been sort of decimated by the pandemic. And I said, I'm going to write every day, and I'm going to get up incredibly early every morning and do it. And I've done it since September, basically. So I get up and I walk very slowly on my treadmill, and and if I'm thinking if I'm thinking really hard, like if it's really first draft, like working it out, I have to stop. Sometimes I can't be walking when I do that.
Oh, how long have you had the treadmill desk?
I've had the treadmill desk probably for about 1.5 years. And I had a standing desk before that. I transitioned to the standing desk because I had a horrible back problem. And I learned that it was because I had been sitting and writing for like my whole life.
Yeah.
And so it was strongly recommended that I do a bunch of things, but start using a standing desk. And I actually got used to it really quickly. And now I don't even have a chair in here. Sometimes I'll sit on the couch and read a draft or whatever, but I'm pretty much always standing when I'm working. I'm standing right now.
I recommend the two extremes. Walk faster, because sometimes your gait gets kind of messed up if you walk slowly. I found walking slowly, I had hip pain when I walked slowly.
Interesting. Yeah, tell me about your experience and your treadmill desk.
Well, I've owned a treadmill desk for like, I think 5 years. And
Wow.
I walk like, I'm sorry, what was that?
Same one?
Yeah, the engine blew out about 2 years ago, so I had to get that replaced. But it's sort of, I mean, I get up, and I've been doing the same thing during the pandemic because I have kids and my husband's been home. My kids are pretty big, so they can handle themselves reasonably well. But I walk like 2 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're talking about like 1 mile an hour.
No, yeah, I think I do 2 miles an hour if I'm doing emails or editing. It's only, I think I have to go about 1 mile an hour if I'm like doing a first draft, but it all
interesting.
2 miles is where my machine tops out. So I go, and then
I think you probably have more precise and beautiful craft than I do. I'm just like, tell that guy, get out of your house.
No, I think you've been doing it for 5 years. So yeah.
It does get easier as you do it more. Do you have a keyboard that's like at your waist and then
Yeah, well, not quite at my waist, but like, yeah, the computer's on a little stand and then the keyboard is below it. And then like the desk is even, it's a whole setup.
Yeah, you got to have the whole setup. Because even on the site, they have like on the site that sells the treadmill desks, they'll often have terrible ergonomics. They'll show people going like this while they like zombies while they write, it's like, that doesn't work.
I know. It's really weird. I never foresaw that I would get into the like accoutrements of writing in particularly this way, but I actually love it. And because there is that part, it's like, there's the part of my brain that was like, okay, if I'm shooting heroin, but I also then drink wheatgrass and go to the gym.
We have so much in common.
There's like the same part of my brain that when I was 20 thought like that is like, yes, I got my like draft finished today and I also walked like 4 miles.
Yes.
Time,
Yes. I mean, there's nothing better. Yesterday I wrote 2 things and I walked 9 miles. I was like,
amazing.
I'm just, now I need like double martini. But what I was going to say is I have a recliner, right? So, which I recommend for back problems because you go on the treadmill desk and you walk forever, 3 hours.
All compressed. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you lean back on your recliner and you have like a neck thing. Like it's more like total support. Like I just want all or nothing. I don't want to support my body unless I'm walking.
That's what they say. Yeah. Is that actually the recliner? It's sort of like sitting up like a little right angle is like the worst. Oh, it's so nerd out with someone about this.
Yeah, I know it's a lot. Let me apologize to anyone who fell asleep during that. What are you working on? Yeah, I guess you probably finished this book maybe a year ago, or
a little over a year ago. But a little over a year ago.
So what have you been writing since then? Have you started something new, or are you just? Are you the kind of person who actually relaxes? It doesn't seem like you take that much time.
I don't, but you know what? It's like
downtime.
The thing that everyone says is the best thing for your experience publishing a book is to be working on the next thing, And with the first 2 books, I was like, but how does anyone do that? Like, who has time for that? Because it's so demanding publishing a book.
Yeah.
And this time it worked out. It was like, I set this intention. I was like, I really want that to be the case. Like, I want to be sort of infatuated with the next project. So I'm excited to get into it on the other side.
Yeah.
And there was actually an essay that was going to be in Girlhood, and I started writing it at the very end of the process. And it was like a super growing plant that was like immediately broke the pot that it was in. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to fit in here. It doesn't, like, the content doesn't really fit in here. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to transplant it and just like let it grow. And so I've been, picking away at it here and there. And it's really sort of about, I write a little bit in one of the essays in Girlhood about how I spent the better part of a year intentionally celibate. And it sort of started with that, and basically the experience of being really alone with myself and how unbelievably transformative that was. And then I started reading about sort of female celibacy throughout history. It sounds like it would be really dry and boring, but it's actually like really amazing and often sexy and fascinating. And so I'm writing about celibacy and sort of, in a larger way, kind of divestment and like what that looks like. And
Interesting.
And I have a craft book coming out next year
What is it called?
It's called Body Work, and it's kind of about personal. It's basically like an argument for personal writing, or sort of against the arguments against personal writing, and how it can be sort of philosophical and intellectual and transformative and spiritual. And it's not like, the thing, of course you do. You're a personal essayist where it's like, oh, isn't that nice? They let you publish your diary, little lady.
When a woman does it, it's a diary, but when a man does it, it's actually philosophy.
Nosgard does it, and they're like, oh my God, it's never been done before.
That's just a genius.
So it's basically like we're genies, and here's why. And here's
that's my style of book right there. So but it's also kind of prescriptive, like.
Yeah, it's a little bit prescriptive. It's a lot about my experience of writing. It's sort of half like memoir, sort of writing narrative. But also I bring into it like, compare it with the like religious process of confession, and talk about like ancient processes and trauma therapy, and how it sort of overlaps with all of these other modes of understanding growing, and how it sort of combines all of those. And that's why it's so powerful.
That sounds really good. And I'm going to read that book too. And then I'll have read 4 books by you. And then the other one was, what was the celibacy. Yeah, I'm reading that. That's 5 books.
So I've got those things. I'm finishing up the craft book, and then I'm the celibacy one is really early stages. So I'm just gonna go read for pleasure this summer and like ruminate about things and actually try to take some time off, because there was a way I found, like, especially publicizing things and talking about yourself, talking about myself. It just like, there has to be a period of time where the tank refills, and for me,
everything
like napping and spending time with people and eating food and reading fun.
I played this game Stardew Valley for about a year after one of my books. I was like, I'm not working on anything.
Was it like a video game?
It's a video game, but all you do is farm.
I've heard about this.
It's very slow.
People love it.
It's really fun. But the dumb thing about it is that I played it frantically. So I'm like, I gotta get these beets in the ground, but spring's almost done and my harvest isn't planted. I'm just like running. It's just like doing errands and work. I tried to get my kids into it and they were like, this is work. Like, you're playing a game about work. I'm like, yeah, but it's relaxing, frantic, mindless work, which I love.
Yeah,
because I work with my brain. And it's tiring.
It's so relatable. I love it. I'm like, work with no stakes. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And these little cartoon melons grow. It's beautiful. Hi, Lonnie.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
What a incredibly great conversation that was in 1 billion% entertaining and enlightening at the same time. And what more could a person ask for? So I want to let folks know we're at about 7:56. We have a few minutes. There's a couple questions here I'm going to run by Melissa. We've been putting links in chat to get a copy of Girlhood, which is just an extraordinary book. Buy it, because we're going to be starting after hours in just a few minutes. Heather and Melissa will have a 5-minute bio break in between, but we'll let everybody in from the waiting room at about 8:05. So come join us. Cameras are on and you can ask your own questions. It's a very lively conversation. So Melissa, I'm going to jump into a couple things. First, number one, and let's do this lightning round because we're at 7:56. So Melissa and Heather, actually, the quick question, of course, folks want to know, which treadmill desk do you recommend? Lori wants to know.
I have one called Rebel Desk.
Rebel Desk?
Mm-hmm.
Heather, what do you use?
That sounds cooler than mine. Mine's called Lifespan. Lifespan. But the only thing I'll say is you want the desk that automated, goes up and down automated. You don't want to stop and crank it. I don't know if you have to crank yours, Melissa.
No, I don't have to crank mine.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sarah asks, what are you both reading lately to inspire you to get your work done? So this isn't just what are you reading, but who are you reading to inspire you to get your work done? Remember, this is lightning round, girls. Okay,
sorry.
Okay, never mind. Never mind. Neither one of you know.
Melissa, so that was my work.
I just got a blessed editor just sent me a galley of Siri Husvet's new essay collection, and I haven't started it yet, but probably it will, because she is so smart and so good that
looks good. Hold that up one more time, Melissa, to the camera.
It's called Mothers, Fathers, and Others by Siri Husvet, who wrote.
When's it coming out?
I don't know when it's coming out.
It usually says on the back. I'll find out later. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
That looks good.
I can tell you.
That looks good. Okay. So let's see. Cara asks, so much of your work is, this is for Melissa, so much of your work is about transgression. And I'm wondering if you could talk about where transgression and transcendence meet in literature. In 3 sentences. No.
Usually at my desk near the end of a project. That's where the transgression gets it. That's actually an honest answer. For me, it happens like in the writing. You know, no matter how I've transgressed in life, it is possible to reach some kind of transcendence through the artistic process.
Catherine wants to know, Melissa, how do you know when an essay you're writing is done? And Heather, my guess is you could chime in as well.
Yeah.
How do you know when you're done?
Right about when I think I'm done, I know I usually have at least 2 more drafts, and I need to give it to someone else to help push me through that final process. Yeah.
Okay. Heather, what about you?
When I read it and I say, I mean, I just did this with my book. When I read the whole thing and I say, I don't want to change anything. I don't want to change anything. I really like this. And then someone else does have to read it just to make sure.
Yeah.
Janet wants to know, Melissa, do you play guitar to decompress? We see the guitar in the background.
Yes, I actually have felt sad for a long time that I don't have any hobbies, because I'm a writer and because I lived in New York. And I mean, there are people with hobbies, but I didn't have them. And so my partner actually bought me that guitar for my birthday in September, and I've been taking lessons online with someone who typically teaches children and is very encouraging and very impressed by my progress. So yes, that is what I do online.
All right, we're going to get to Raisa's question, then we're going to log off. So Raisa asks, Melissa and Heather, thank you so much for your work in the world. Melissa, you write in the last page of Girlhood about touchstones and no longer needing to, quote, fling yourself against anything. I'm wondering, are there new touchstones in your world, on the page or off, you find yourself reaching towards after setting certain ones down?
I would say that the touchstones I use now are much softer. They're less likely to leave marks. And I would say probably my relationships are the places where I'm able to measure how I've changed and how I've grown and my own worth.
Oh, great. Heather, I want to thank you for what was just really an extraordinary interview. You know, I've seen a million of them, as you know, and you are just 1,000,000,000%. You know, we adore like every inhale and exhale that you have, but you are just amazing. That was just so
It really was.
Perfect. And I have a feeling Melissa probably feels the same. So everyone, thank you so, Melissa,
you,
and thank you
Lonnie.
so much for gracing Fan with your book tour. I know it's been a busy time. I got a couple more questions for you in the after hours that I've been kind of wondering about. So I hope you guys are going to join us. We're going to have a good time. Thank you everyone for coming.